This was one of those few movies going into this summer that I was really looking forward to, while also dreading. Now, of course, the obvious reason I was looking forward to this movie is because I've said numerous times that Pixar Studios is one of the last few remaining studios in Hollywood dedicated to telling very good stories. There's only been 1 or 2 movies put out by Pixar that I haven't thoroughly enjoyed, and even the ones that I didn't love, I still thought the stories were incredible. So it was for that reason I was looking forward to Toy Story 3. However, I was also slightly dreading this movie, because I was afraid that Pixar is starting to get into a bit too much of sequelitis. Basically, Pixar has a lot of sequels planned in the coming years. For those of you who don't know, Pixar currently has slated a Monsters, Inc. 2, a Cars 2, and it is rumored that there's going to be an Incredibles 2. With this in mind, a lot of people have been questioning the motives of Pixar, that they only want to make money off of sequels instead of creating new and original stories. Happily, I can say that this movie was very, very good. Now, this isn't a flawless movie. It's not perfect, but it is a very enjoyable experience, and I think anyone, no matter what age they are, will take something good away from this film. Now, for those of you who have seen any of the trailers or previews for this movie, or if you've seen the previous 2 movies, you pretty much know what the story is going into the theater. This movie takes place about 8 or 9 years after the events of Toy Story 2, and Andy, who is the owner of all these toys, is going off to college. So Andy has to make a choice of a few things. Either he's taking all the toys to college with him, which would seem pretty dumb for a kid his age, or he could store the toys away in the attic, or he could throw them away. Or his sister brings up a 4th option, which is donating them to Sunnyside Daycare. Now, the majority of the toys would rather stay behind in his attic. However, the thought of being played with at a daycare seems almost promising at times. So the toys end up finding their way to this daycare, and it seems almost like a beautiful retirement home for toys. They get cared for, there's tons of batteries, there's a lot of camaraderie between the toys that are already there. It seems like the perfect place to stay. However, as it is with Toy Story, things are not always what they seem. It turns out that this beautiful daycare is really more like a prison for toys, and that newcomers to this daycare have to get played with by these really obnoxious brats that basically destroy toys. So the toys' motives from the majority of this movie are trying to escape this daycare. So let me say that almost every element of this movie worked great. One thing that continues to amaze me is how much better the animation gets with every subsequent Toy Story movie. You could tell with the first Toy Story that computer animation was still in its infancy, and that a lot of the stuff you were seeing on screen was very experimental. With Toy Story 2, the animation really improved, and so did the storytelling. With Toy Story 3, not only do we have very, very good animation, but we also have very good storytelling. And speaking of the storytelling, the themes and plot of this movie are good, but sadly it's nothing original. In Toy Story 2, we have a theme of Woody trying to get back to Andy. Basically, Woody has been dislocated from Andy and the rest of the toys, and he has to try to get back. However, Woody comes to the realization that eventually Andy isn't going to want to play with him anymore, and Woody has to deal with his own mortality. Woody has to deal with the fact that eventually one day no one will want to play with him. He could hang behind with Jessie, Bullseye, and the Prospector and be loved by children forever. Of course, Woody makes the former choice and decides to stick with Andy. In this movie, you basically have the exact same theme, except applied on a much more global scale. You have all of the toys having to deal with their own mortality. Now, all of the toys are not getting played with by Andy, and all of the toys have to deal with the fact of either going back to Andy and staying in the attic forever, or having to stay in this daycare and be loved by children forever. However, they'd be abandoning their owner. Woody, of course, having already made the choice in the second movie, wants to stick with Andy. However, all the rest of the toys make the latter choice. They want to stay in the daycare. They want to be loved for all time by these young kids. Now, just because the theme isn't original doesn't mean it's not good. I still thought the storytelling and that theme was very well played out in this movie. And Pixar throws in just enough twists and road bumps along the way to keep the audience really entertained. And one thing that left me sort of surprised with this movie, but actually made me enjoy it a little bit more, was the fact that this movie got kinda dark at the end. Now, there have been a few Pixar movies that have been kind of depressing and dark at times. Perfect examples would be Incredibles and Up. This movie has a few very dark themes throughout the middle and end, and you feel really sad for some of these characters. In fact, there is a new character introduced in this movie named Loxo Bear. And I don't want to ruin the backstory of this character, but the backstory of Loxo Bear is really depressing. But you know what? I like that. I like the fact that Pixar feels as though they don't have to talk down the kids. Pixar knows that kids can handle these themes, and it's not something that's going to go over their heads and they're not going to understand. Kids can pick up on these themes just as much as parents can, and it's because of that that I enjoy these movies all the much more. So, final rating. I really did enjoy this movie. In fact, it may be too early to say this, but I would call Toy Story 3 the best animated movie of this year. Now, is this the best Pixar movie of all time? That's a bit of a stretch. I believe that title is still held by Finding Nemo or WALL-E. But that being said, this was still a very good movie for young and old alike. If you are a fan of Pixar, or if you've seen the first two Toy Stories and loved them, you will instantly fall in love with this movie. I'm going to give Toy Story 3 4 stars. It's not the most original story to come out of Pixar over the last few years, but certainly a very enjoyable time, and I would recommend anyone get out and see it while you can. I'll leave you all with this, because I brought up this question at work the other day, and it was a very interesting discussion I had because of it. After seeing Toy Story 3, it is my personal belief that the trilogy of Toy Story is one of the best movie trilogies of all time. Now, when I say trilogies, I mean movies that actually have 3 parts, such as Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, The Godfather, Back to the Future. If you were to make a list of the best trilogies of all time, I would have those 4 listed, and then I would have Toy Story. This trilogy has been so good that I would consider it easily in the top 5 trilogies of all time. Now, some of my friends at the theater consider it kind of blasphemous to compare Lord of the Rings to Toy Story, but you know what? I don't think it is. This trilogy has been so good, and the stories have been told so well, that I think this trilogy is going to be talked about and spoken about for decades to come. So, take care.